The Ultimate Millennia by Aldiss. Again we must use a symbol. Time passed, time is stretched to its limits, extended almost beyond meaning, for time now rolls down a gentle decline of innumerable centuries towards the sunset of Yinisfar and its galaxy. It was a time of contrast. Those planets and systems which, while the self-perpetuating war was in full spate, had once been linked by the bond of enmity and had now not enough in common even to be rivals. It was a time of discovery and constellation, consolidation of experiment and abdication of hope and resignation, of the historian and the prophet. It was a time of the exploration of the inner resources of man. With his last frontiers tamed, man turned in towards the self. There he went on foot, alone without that grey steed science in which he had trusted for so long, alone into the labyrinth of his own devices. Humanity had multiplied, every world bore a mighty crowd of people, but the crowd no longer jostled and shouted. Each individual remained by choice to himself an island. It was the silver period of the age of splendour and starlight. Soon only the starlight would remain. Towards the end of the great pageant, it may be the stage is at its most crowded. A sea of faces, brightly lit, greets us even as the curtains begin their final downward sweep. Towards the end of a symphony, it may be the whole orchestra puts forth its full efforts. Only a minute before, silence falls, and the music becomes a memory. Throughout one vast arena, silence was falling, the last silence of all. You never knew the beginning of that train of events which led you to Yinisfar and the world of shadows. You never knew Shouter by name. He operated far from what most men reckoned as civilization, right out on the rim of the galaxy, so that on his frequent sweeps from one planet to another, he rarely saw stars on both sides of his cabin. There they would be, a whole galaxy full on one side, burning bright and high, and on the other a cliff of emptiness that stretched from eternity to eternity, the distant island universes only accentuating the gulf. Shouter generally kept his eyes on the stars, but not on this trip. Shouter was a spool seller by trade. His little starcraft was packed with rack upon rack of microspools. He stocked all kinds, new and antiquarian, philosophical, sociological, mathematical. If you went through them systematically, you could almost piece together the eon-old history of the galaxy. It was not, however, on these learned spools that Shouter made his best money. They paid for the fuel, but not for the drinks. The spools that really brought in the profits dealt with a subject older than history, and with figures more ineluctable than any in the mathematician's vocabulary. Their subject was desire. Erotic spools depicting the devices of lust formed Shouter's stock in trade, and because such items were illegal, Shouter stood in perpetual fear of the customs officials of 100 worlds. Now he was elated. He had just neatly outwitted the petty guardian of morality and sold about half his holdings under their very eyes. That he took too much drink in celebration was to influence your entire life. An empty merit bottle rolled by his feet. It was hot in the small cabin of his ship, and he dozed off, sprawling over the controls. Shouter woke muzzily. He sensed something was wrong, and his head cleared at once as he peered anxiously into the forward vision tanks. No clouds of accustomed stars were in view. Hurriedly he flipped on rear vision. There lay the galaxy like a tinsel disk, far behind him. Shouter swallowed and checked fuel, low but enough to get back. To get back on. Fuel, however, was in better supply than air. His oxygen tanks had not been replenished in the hurry of his last departure. He would never get back to the galaxy alive on the thimblefuls that remained. Within an abyss opening in his stomach, Shouter turned to the forward ports again to examine an object he had previously ignored. Apart from the distant phantoms of other galaxies, it was the only object to relieve the inane ubiquity of vacuum, and it was showing a disk. He checked with his instruments. Undoubtedly, it was a small sun. It puzzled Shouter. His astronomical knowledge was negligible, but he knew that according to the laws there was nothing between galaxies. That long funnel of night shut off galaxy from galaxy, as surely as the living were cut off from the dead. He could only suppose the sun ahead to be a tramp star. Such things were known, and they naturally moved inside the giant lens of the home galaxy, in conformity with its gravitational pull. Shouter threw the problem aside, unsolved. All that vitally concerned him was whether the sun, wherever it came from, had one more oxygen planet in attendance. One or more oxygen planets in attendance. It had. The Sun was a white dwarf with one planet almost as big as itself. A quick stratospheric test as Shouter glided into braking orbit showed a breathable nitrogen-oxygen balance. Blessing his luck, the spool seller sped down and landed. A valley fringed by hills and woods embraced him. He walked out of the airlock in good fettle, leaving the compressor analyzer systems working to ensure full tanks of purified oxygen drawn from the planet's air. It was hot outside. Shouter had an immediate impression of newness everywhere. Everything seemed fresh, gleaming. His eyes ached at the vividness. The shores of a lake lay a few yards away. He began to walk towards it, conscious at the same time of a vague discomfort in his breathing. With deliberate effort, he inhaled more slowly, thinking the air might be too rich for him. Something rose to the surface of the lake a distance away. It looked like a man's head, but Shouter could not be sure. A mist rising from the surface of the lake, as if the waters were hot, obscured detail. The hurt in his lungs became more definite. He was conscious, too, of a smart spreading across his limbs, almost as if the air were too harsh for them. In his eyes, all things acquired a fluttering spectrum. He had had the assurance of his instruments that all was well, but suddenly that assurance meant nothing. He was in pain, all in panic. All in a panic. Shouter turned to get back to his ship. He coughed and fell, dizziness overcoming him. Now he saw it was indeed a man in the misty lake. He shouted for help, once only. You looked across at him, and at once started to swim in his direction. But Shouter was dying. His cry brought blood up into his throat, splashing out over one hand. He choked, attempting to rise again. You climbed naked out of the lake towards him. He saw you, turning his head heavily, and flung one arm out, gesturing toward the ship with its imagined safety. As you got to him, he died. For a while you knelt by him, considering. Then you turned away and regarded the small starship for the first time. You went over to it, your eyes full of wonder. The sun rose and set 25 times before you mastered all that Shouter's ship contained. You touched everything gently, almost reverently. Those microspools meant little individually to you at first, but you were able to refer back to them and piece the jigsaw of their sequence together until the picture they gave you formed the whole picture. Shouter's projector was almost worn out before you finished. Then you investigated the ship itself, sucking out its meaning like a thirsty man. Your thoughts must have moved strangely in those 25 days, like sluice gates opening for the first time as you became yourself. All you learned then was already knowledge, the way in which you pieced it together with genius, but nevertheless it was knowledge already held by many men. The results of research and experience. Only afterwards, when you integrated that knowledge, did you make a deduction on your own behalf. The deduction, involving as it did all the myriad lives in the galaxy, was so awing, so overwhelming, that you tried to evade it. You could not. It was inescapable. One clinching fact was the death of Shouter. You knew why he had died, so you had to act, obeying your first moral imperative. Just for a moment, you looked at your bright world. You would return to it when duty had been done. You climbed up into Shouter's ship, punched out a course on the computer, and headed towards the galaxy. You came unarmed into the warring city. Your ship lay abandoned on a hill some miles away. You walked as if among the properties of a dream, carrying your own supplies, and demanded to see the leader of the rebel army. They put innumerable difficulties in your way, but eventually you stood before him because none could gainsay you. The rebel leader was a hard man with an eye missing, and he was busy when you entered. He stared at you with deep mistrust through that single eye. The guards behind him stroked their fuses. "I'll give you 3 minutes," one eye said. "I don't want your time," you said easily. "I have plenty of my own. I also have a plan bigger than any plan of yours. Do you wish me to show you how to subjugate the regions of Yenisvar?" Now One Eye looked at you again. He saw you how should it be said? He saw you were not as other men, that you were vivider than they. But the region of Yenisvar lay long light years away, impregnable, in the heart of the galaxy. For twice 10 million years its reign had been undisputed among twice 10 million planets. "You're mad," One Eye said. "Get out. Our objective is to conquer this city, not a galaxy." You did not move. Why did the guards not act then? Why did not One Eye shoot you down before you had begun your task? "This civil war you wage here is fruitless," you said. What are you fighting for? A city? The next street? A powerhouse? These are spoils fit only for scavengers. I offer you the wealth of Yinisvar. One Eye stood up, showing his teeth. The unkempt hair on his neck rose like prickles. His leather cheeks turned mauve. He jerked up his fuser and thrust it towards your face. You did nothing. There was nothing you needed to do. Confounded, One Eye sat down again. He had not met such relentless indifference to threats before and was impressed. Aulenge is only a poor planet with a long history of oppression, he muttered. But it is my world. I have to fight for it and the people on it, to protect their rights and liberties. I admit that a man of my tactical ability deserves a better command, possibly when we've brought this city to his knees. Because time was on your side, you had patience. Because you had patience, you listened to One Eye. His talk was at once grandiose and petty. He spoke largely of the triumph of human rights and narrowly of the shortage of trained soldiers. He wanted heaven on earth, but he was a platoon short. He was a man who won respect from his fellows, of fear if not respect. Yet his principles had been old-fashioned a million millennia ago, before the beginnings of space travel. They had worn wafer thin, used over and over again by countless petty generals. The need for force, the abolition of injustice, the belief that right would win through. You listened with a chill pity, aware that the age-old and majestic intricacies of the self-perpetuating war had shrunk to this pocket of trouble on Aulenge. When he stopped orating, you told One Eye your plan for conquering Inisvar. You told him that living on Aulenge, on the cold rim of the galaxy, he could have no idea of the richness of those central worlds, that all the fables the children of Aulenge learned in their meagre beds did not convey 1/10 of the wealth of the suzerain of Inisvar, that every man there had his destiny and happiness guarded imperishably. Well, we're always underprivileged out here, growled One Eye. What can anyone here do against the power of the region? So you told him, unsmilingly, that there was one aspect in which Yinisvar was inferior. It could not, in all its systems, command a general who displayed the sagacity and fearlessness that One Eye was renowned for. Its peoples had lost their old lusty arrogance and had declined into mere reverie begetters. All that is so, One Eye admitted reluctantly, though I have never cared to say so myself. They are a decadent lot. Decadent, you exclaimed. They are decadent beyond all belief. They hang like a giant overripe fruit, waiting to drop and splash. You really think so? Listen, how long has there been peace throughout the galaxy? Except, of course, for your little difference of opinion here. For millions of years, is that not so? Is it not so peaceful that even interstellar trade has dwindled almost to nothing? I tell you, my friend, the mighty nations of the stars have nodded off to sleep. Their warriors, their technicians, have been untested for generations. Their science rust beneath a pool of complacency. Now you had One Eye on his feet again. This time he was yours, the first of your list of conquests. He let out a roar of excitement. By Thraldemena! It is as you say, he shouted. They wouldn't know how to fight. They are degenerate. Come, there is no time to be lost. We will begin the liberation of the people of Yinisvar tomorrow, my friend. Why couldn't I have thought of the idea myself? Wait, you said. You touched his tattered sleeve as he came around the desk. He felt something of your vitality course through him and waited obediently. If Aulenge is to conquer, it must be united. Your forces are not sufficient in themselves to match the dying might of the region. The civil war must end. At this One Eye frowned, looked uncertain. Above all else, he had wanted to reduce this little city to ashes. You can't stop a civil war just like that, he protested. You and I go and see the enemy commander, you said. And although he protested and swore, that was what you and One Eye did. Treading carefully over the debris, you left by what had been the west gate and came to the improvised shields of leaden sand, which marked One Eye's present forward position. Here One Eye began to argue again. You silenced him. With one man to accompany you and bear the white flag of truce, you put on a radiation suit, as One Eye had done, and climbed out into the street. This had once been a fine avenue. Now the tall exequag trees were splintered like bone, and the fronts of many buildings demolished. Several robo-tanks lay locked together on the scarred pavements. Nothing moved. But as you walked, you must have been aware of the unseen eyes of the enemy watching you behind their levelled sights. At the top of the avenue, a mechanical voice halted you and asked you what you wanted. When its attendant echoes had gone chattering away among the ruins, One Eye bellowed out his name and demanded to see the enemy general. Within 2 minutes, a transparent disc using beam power dropped out of the sky. A door slid open and the mechanical voice shouted, "Please get in." Entering with your two companions, you were at once lifted to a height just above the rooftops. The disc flicked 2 blocks to the north before sinking again. The door opened and you climbed out. You were in a slaughter yard. No animals were here now, although a wall with a line of fuser marks, heart high, showed that the place had not entirely abandoned its ancient purposes. Two captains met you under a white flag. They saluted One Eye and led you out of the yard. Down a deep ramp, you descended to a part of the old-fashioned pneumatic running under the city, where you removed your radiation suit. Here a maze of new corridors had been constructed. Down one of them you were led until a white-plated door was reached. The grim captains indicated you were to go in. You entered. Well, you traitor, what makes you think you will leave here alive? The enemy general asked One Eye. His uniform was trim, if worn. His eyes had a quelling fire to them. He walked as true soldiers have walked since time immemorial, as if the discs of the backbone had all then been welded together, and Welded had a little moustache, which now bristled with triumph at the sight of his foe. Temporarily forgetting all but his old feud, One Eye advanced as if he would tear that moustache from the other's upper lip. Shake hands, you two, you said impatiently. Come to terms immediately. The sooner arrangements are made, the better. Welded looked at you for the first time. He seemed instantly to comprehend that it was you rather than One Eye with whom he had to deal. Welded was an intelligent man. Instantly he was ice cold, his voice ground straight off a glacier. I have no idea who you are, fellow, but I have he said, but I have any suspicion of impotence of you, I'll have you beamed. With your friend here, I must be more careful. His head is destined for the city gate. You are entirely expendable. On that I reserve my own opinion, you said. We did not come here to bandy threats, but to make you an offer. If you are prepared to listen, listen now. In the scale of emotions, there is a stage beyond fury, where fury cools, and a stage beyond anger, where it merges into fear. As Welded reached this point, he stiffened as if he would snap. He could say nothing. We began to talk of Yunisvar. Welded was a harder man to deal with than his enemy, more seasoned, more sure of himself, though a faint concupiscent smile curled his lip. When you spoke of the richness of the region, he never unbent. When you finished, he spoke. Are you a native of Arlenge, stranger? He asked. No, you said. What is your world, stranger? It is the planet beyond the galaxy. There is nothing beyond between the galaxies. What is the name of the world of yours, stranger? It is unnamed, you said. Now Welded snapped a finger angrily. You have an odd way of trying to win my confidence, he said. What do the inhabitants of your world call it? There are no inhabitants, he said. I am the first. It is unnamed because I have not named it. Then I will name it. Welded snarled. I name it lies. All lies. Every word is a lie. You are a spy from distant Yunisvar, a dupe, an assassin. Guards! As he shouted, he wrenched the fuser from its holster. One Eye kicked out, caught Welded's fist with the toe of his boot, and sent the weapon flying across the room. Listen, you lunatic, he roared at Welded. Would you kill this man who offers us so much? Suppose he is a spy from Yunisvar. Would that not make him the ideal man to lead us back there? We need not trust him. Let us seize the advantage of having him in our hands. Even while One Eye was speaking, the ceiling had lifted 3 feet through the widening gap. Armed men catapulted themselves into the room, pitting you and the rebel leader into different corners. In no time, you were enmeshed in clawed metal nets. Welded stayed them with a raised hand. There is a grain of truth in what you say, he admitted reluctantly. Guards, leave us. We will talk. 2 hours later, when Aldiss brought in wine for you and the commanders, the argument was over and plans were being discussed. By tacit agreement, the question of your origin was abandoned. Both men had decided that wherever you came from, it was not from the region of Yunisvar. No one from that vast empire had bothered with the outer rims of the galaxy for millennia. I came to you, you told them, because this is one of the few planets near my world on which any form of military organization still survives. I thought they were flattered. They failed to see that you regarded them merely as remnants of an outdated creed. The only advantage of a military organization over any of them, from your point of view, was its ability to get into action without inordinate delay. 2 hours later still, when one of Welded's orderlies entered with food, Welded was just making the last of numerous calls to the garrisons of Arlenge. How many interstellar vessels do you hold that can be put into active service at once? He asked into the speaker. Yes, all told, I see 15. How many of those are light drive? Only 5. What type are those 5? He wrote the answers down, reading them out as he did, for your benefit and One Eye's. 1 freighter, 1 liner converted to military use, 1 trooper and 2 invaders. Good. Now give me their tonnages. He wrote the tonnages down, scowled, nodded, and said with authoritative sharpness to the unseen commander, Excellent. You will receive instructions in the morning as regards fueling and equipping of those 5 ships. As for the other 10, get your electronics arm on them immediately. I want them equipped with light drive and ready to bust vacuum within 48 hours. Is that understood? And please confine all your men to camp until further orders. Is that understood? Good. Any queries? I leave it all to your ingenuity, Commander. Good. Good night. A jolt in the teeth for him. Well, it said with satisfaction as he signed off. For the first time he regarded the orderly who had brought in the food. Is the general ceasefire being obeyed? He demanded. Yes, sir, the orderly said. The people are dancing in the streets. We'll give us something to dance about soon, Welder said, rubbing his hands. He turned to One Eye, who was juggling with pieces of paper. What's our strength, he asked. Depends how many of these light drive conversions craft actually materialize. With our present shortage of men and materials, say 50%, Welder said. Right, One Eye scanned his one eye over the sheet of figures. Including my own fleets, say 110 starships, about two-thirds of which will be military, they looked at each other briefly. Provincial though they were, a number still sounded faintly small. It is ample, you said confidently. They turned to the formidable problem of rations. The fleet could reckon on being vacuum-borne for 2 weeks before reaching the marches of the region, another 2.5 weeks to reach the heart, another 3 days to the pivotal world of Innisfail itself. And that allows no time for delay caused by evasive action or battle, Weldon said. They may capitulate before we reach Innisfail itself, you said. We must have safety margin, Weldon insisted. Let's call it a 6-week journey, and we'll be 5,500 strong. He shook his head. We can cope with air supply. The calorie intake is going to be the snag. Those men will eat their heads off in that time. There's just not that amount of food on all our ends. Deep freeze is our only answer. Everyone below the rank of major, not on essential duty, travels frozen. Get me medical. Orderly, I want to speak to the physician general. The orderly hastened to obey. What's next? Weldon asked. He was beginning to enjoy himself. Weapons, One Eye said. First, fissionable material. My forces can't help much there. Our stocks happen to be lower than usual. Here is a report on our holdings as of last week, Weldon said, tossing a stereoed list over. Stocks are meagre, I'm afraid. You glanced at the list over One Eye's shoulder. It is ample, you said encouragingly. At first, it must have seemed as if the scheme might succeed. Again, the feeling must have assailed you that you lived in an unlikely dream whose scenery you could puncture with a finger. As you sat in the flagship with the two commanders, you had no nerves, you did not worry. Weldon and One Eye in their individual ways both showed strain now that they were embarked on the journey. The captain of the ship, Fleet Commander Prim, had to endure much quiet nagging. The early days passed uneventfully. Beyond the port, space hung becalmed, its blazing stars mere specks in the distance. Its ancient splendours nothing more than points to navigate by. The other ships were not visible to the unaided eye. The flagship might have been travelling alone. When they had blasted from Owlenge, the ships in the invasion fleet had numbered 117. By the end of the first week, 5 had to give up and limp home again. Their 2 hastily contrived light drives burned out. It would take them, under normal thrust, half a year to regain port. By then their crews would be asphyxiated, all the survivors breathing the oxygen of murdered men. The rest of that fleet sailed on, holds full of soldiers, in suspense animation, all neatly stacked and racked like bottles. They had been vacuum-borne 16 days and were past those stars generally regarded as outposts of the Empire of Innisfail when they were first challenged. A station calling itself Camoens 2 RST 225, the communication chief reported, ask us why we have passed Coromandel Tangent 10 without identifying ourselves. Let it keep on calling, you said. Other challenges were received and left unanswered. The fleet stayed silent as it startled to life the worlds about it. Communications began to intercept messages of alarm and warning between planetary stations. Galcon the Sabre, calling Rolf 158, unidentified craft, due to pass you on course 99GY 4281 at 07.1430. Gal approx. Acrostic 1 to Schiaparelli base. Look out and report on fleet now entering home sector Paradise 014. Pike Picoing. Astronomical to Duoxy Pylon. Unidentified ships numbering 130. Approx. Now crossing scanning area. Code Diamond. Index 09. All stations on Ishrael link to procedure BAB 91 into operation immediately. One Eye snorted his contempt. We've certainly set these provincial globes in a flutter, he said. As the hours passed by, he grew less easy. Space, almost silent a watch ago, now became numerous with voices, Soon the murmur grew into a babel. The note of curiosity at first indicating little more than mild interest showed a corresponding rise through irritation into alarm. Perhaps we ought to answer them, one I suggested. Couldn't we spin them some tale to keep them quiet? Tell them we are going to pay homage or something? You need to have no worry about the message we can understand, Prim said. We are picking up several in code now. They are the ones which should cause us most concern. Haven't we some sort of yarn to keep them quiet? One Eye repeated, appealing to you. You were looking out into the darkness, almost as if you could see through the veil of it, almost as if you expected to see the messages, flashing like comets before the ports. The truth will emerge, you said, without turning round. 2 days later, the Parazon picked up the first ship they had detected since leaving Orange. It can't be a ship, the communication chief was saying, waving a film mug with the report on it. But it must be, the sub almost pleaded. Look at its course. You plotted it back yourself. It's definitely turning. What a ship could maneuver? It can't be a ship, the chief repeated. Why can't it be a ship? Prim asked. Beg pardon, sir, but the thing is at least 30 miles long. After a silence, One Eye asked, which way is it coming? The sub spoke up. He alone seemed delighted at the fish they had caught on their screen. It has turned since we had it under observation through 30 to 40 degrees northerly, from a course about due northwest with respect to galactic quadratura. One Eye grasped the back of the sub's couch as if it were the sub's neck. What I want to know, he growled, is if it's going away or coming towards us. Neither, said the sub, looking at the screen again. It now seems to have finished turning and is moving along a course which is at 90 degrees to ours. Any signal from it, Prim asked? Nothing. Put a shot across its bows, One Eye suggested. You're not grovelling along the streets of Owlenge now, taking pot shots at all, and suddenly let it go. One Eye turned angrily to find Welded there. The latter had come up on the bridge early. He stood and watched the blob fade from the Parazon screen before he spoke again. Then, beckoning One Eye aside and looking to make sure you were not then present on the bridge, he said in a low voice, My friend, I have something to confess to you. He looked anxiously and with distaste at One Eye's whiskery countenance before continuing. My early fears are coming back to me, he said. You know I am a man of courage, but even a hero does wisely to be afraid at times. Every hour we dive deeper into a hornet's nest. Do you realize that? Why, we are only 2.5 weeks from Hyinus itself. I cannot sleep for asking myself if we are not running into something from which there will be no escape. Reluctant as he was to agree with an old enemy, One Eye could not miss his chance of confiding his own anxieties. Ship's 30 miles long, he exclaimed. Nodding mysteriously, Welded persuaded the other to come down to his cabin before he would say more. Then he thumped the bulkhead. Only a watcher's journey from here, he said, thumping again for emphasis, are many rich planets. They will be as plunder-worthy as the planets in the heart of the region, but less well guarded. Can't you just picture them at this very moment, loaded with plump semi-blondes, with rings on every finger, fat little men dallying with big bank accounts? They're wide open, defenceless. Why go on to Yunisvar, where undoubtedly we shall meet with resistance? Why not stop here, plunder what we can, and get back to Owlenge while the going is good? One Eye hesitated, his lips thrust out. He liked the suggestion every bit as much as his ex-enemy had expected he would. But there was one major obstacle. He set his heart on getting to Yunisvar itself. Yes, I think we've put up with him long enough, Welded replied. They did not need to mention your name. When away from the aura of your presence, their misgivings about you were mutual. Welded crossed to a cupboard, taking out a small and tightly stoppered bottle. This should solve that problem, he said. It contained a deadly venom. To smell one drop of it a yard away would give a man headaches for a week. Something to flavour his wine with tonight. Oh, Welded said. When the wine went round the cabin's table after dinner, One Eye accepted his glass but could not drink. He felt sick with suspense, and with the sickness went a loathing for Welded. Not only did he disapprove of poisoning as a devious method of killing, but he understood clearly that the little bottle held more than enough to spare for him too. Should Welded feel like disposing of all his opposition at once? You had no such qualms. You took your glass when it was filled, toasted, as you did every night. The success of the expedition drained down the wine. This wine tastes flat, you said. We will stock up with a better vintage on Yunisvar. Everyone around the table laughed with you, except for One Eye, the muscles of his face contorted. He could not even force himself to look at Welded. What did you make of 30-mile-long object we started earlier? Prim asked you, taking his wine at a more sedate pace. It was a Unisvar ship, you said, easily. But don't worry about it. Evolution will take care of it, just as the evolution took care of the prehistoric monsters that once rode Owledge and other planets. The captain spread his hands. For a practical man, that seems a strangely unpractical remark, he said. Evolution is one thing, super ships quite another. Only if you forget that evolution is nature's scientific method, and starships, not being organic creatures, are a part of man's evolution, and man himself is but a part of nature's scientific method. I trust you don't imagine at this late date in time that man is not the end product of evolution, he asked you. We are constantly being told that the galaxy is too old for anything but final extinction. I imagine nothing, you told him pleasantly, but remember, what triumphs ultimately is something too vast for comprehension, yours or mine. You stood up and the others followed suit. Soon the dinner room was empty except for two very puzzled conspirators. For just over 4 weeks the Owlenge fleet had been vacuum-borne. Now the craft were deep within the star-cluttered heart of the galaxy. Suns which carried as an incidental burden hundreds of millions of years of histories and myths of man, burned on all sides like funeral torches. The graveyard air was reinforced by silence over all wave bands. The chatter of alarmed planets had died away to nothing. "They are waiting for us," One-Eye exclaimed, not for the first time. He lived on the bridge of a flagship, now staring for hours at a time at the seemingly motionless spectacles of the universe. Much to the captain's unstated disapproval, the bridge had also become Weldon's living quarters. He spent most of the time lying on his bed with a fuser under his pillow, and never looked out of the ports. You came frequently to the bridge, but seldom spoke to the two. You were detached. You might have been all a dream. Yet for all that, you were at times noticeably impatient, speaking abruptly, sometimes clicking your fingers in suppressed irritation, almost as if you wished to wake up from the tedium of your sleep. Only Fleet Commander Prim remained completely unchanged. The routine of command stayed him. He seemed to have absorbed all the confidence One-Eye and Weldon had lost. "We shall ground on Unisvar in 6 days," he said to you. "Is it possible they intend to offer us no resistance?" "It is possible to think of excellent reasons for their non-existence," you said. "Owlenge had been isolated from the Federation for generations, and has little knowledge of current intellectual attitudes within the region. They may all be pacifists eager to prove their faith, or, on the other hand of the scale, their military hierarchy, without war to thin its ranks, may already have collapsed under our unexpected pressure. It's all speculation." At that second the parasol exploded. An icy clatter rang along the floor as ruptured metal and glass showered out of the panel, while gusts of acrid smoke settled like mesh over the bridge. A babble of voices broke out. "Get the communications chief," Prim barked, but the chief was already on the job, calling over the intercom for a stretcher party and the electronics crew. Weldon was inspecting the damage, fanning away smoke, which still siphoned out of a red-hot crater in the panels. His spine arched as tensely as a pre-stressed girder. "Luke," called One-Eye. The hysterical edge to his voice was so compelling that even in this moment of crisis every eye present swiveled to where his finger pointed. Out, out they stared into the hard pageant of night beyond the ports. Their eyes had to probe and focus before they saw. Flies, flies, rising in a cloud from a dark stream on whose surface sunlight glittered, so that between dark and light the insects were almost lost to view. But the stream was space itself, and the glitter of a spangle of suns, and the flies spread across them, a cloud of ships, the ancient force of Unisvar were rising to the attack. "You can't count them," One-Eye said, glaring aghast at the swarm of ships. "There must be thousands." They blew out the instrument panel. It was a sort of warning. By plough and tow, they'll blow us into eternity at any moment. Turning on a heel, he crossed the promenade and confronted you. "You brought us into this," he said. "What are you trying to do to get us away? How do we save ourselves?" "Leave to the captain and be silent," he said. You said. You moved away before he touched you and stood by the captain. The short wave was unimpaired, and he spoke rapidly to the squadron leaders of his fleet. On a live schematic above his head, the result of those orders immediately became apparent. The Owlengian fleet was deploying into its individual squadrons, spreading into fan parsecs wide. They moved towards the curtain of flies like an opening hand. At maximum speed they moved, straight for the enemy navies. "They're too ready for us," Prim said to you out of the corner of his dry mouth. There aren't enough of us to be effective. It's nothing but suicide. What else do you suggest? You asked him. If every ship made for a planet, orbited, held it under threat of demolition, no, they'd pick us off one by one. He shook his head. This is the only possible way, he said quietly, again turning all his attention to the manoeuvre. Farther talk was impossible. The waiting ships and a handful of charging starcraft slid together. The gulf between them suddenly became trellised with blue flame, electric, blinding. Square links of force opened and shut like champing mouths. Whatever its power source, the drain must have been phenomenal, consuming the basic energies of space itself. The Owl Engine's ships found themselves on the defensive before invasion was more than a panicky thought. That chopping trellis flared before their ports, snapped and was gone. Flared and snapped again, bathing every bridge in its eccentric luminance, and dazzling, consuming. It was the last light thousands of eyes ever saw. The ships on which those blue jaws closed burned magnesium bright. They burned, then sagged into limbo, leached of life, but the invaders were tearing through space at formidable speeds, nor was the terrifying trellis properly in phase. Whoever controlled it could not control its precise adjustment. Its scissor action was too slow. Many ships hurtled through the interstices and into the ranks of the Innisfar fleet. A glance at the schematic showed Prim he had only about 40 ships left, raggedly out of formation. Superfusers, fire, he roared. No one at immense melee of armour had ever been in a space battle before. The galaxy, in its tired old age, had long since hung up its swords. Of all the astute minds following the rapid interplay of strategy, Prim's was the quickest to seize advantage. The mighty ranks of Innisfar had placed too much reliance on their trellis device. They were temporarily numbed to find survivors on their side of it. Owlen shook them out of their numbness. Sunbursts of superfusers cascaded among them, leaping and feeding from ship to ship, coruscating with cosmic energy, while the attackers plunged through the devastated ranks and were away. The Innisfar vessels were also in rapid movement. In no time they had dispersed, safe from the fusion centre, where 20 score of their sister ships had perished. We're through, Hugh said. On to Innisfar itself. It will ransom our safety. The enemy fleet was not so easily outdistanced, however. Several units were already overtaking the invaders at staggering velocity. Among them was the 30-mile-long craft they had sighted some days earlier. And there were 3 more like it, Welder said from his position at the ports. Look, how can anything travel that fast? Prim wrenched the flagship into a spin south. They altered course just in time. The overtakers launched a black mass like smoke directly ahead of their old position. The smoke was molecularized, sleety, capable of riddling the flagship like a moth in a carpet, leaving it mere gravel over the spaceways. In this manoeuvre, sight of the 4 giant vessels was lost. Then they spun into sight again, and with mind-wrenching turns, formed the 4 points of an enormous square ahead of the flagship. No human could stand G's like that. They are robot-controlled, you said, gripped by the fascination of battle. And they put out the trellis screen, Prim said. It was a flash of inspiration, shortly to be proved correct. He turned and barked orders at bombardment, telling them to hit the giants at any cost. By now the flagship was on its own, the rest of its company disintegrated or scattered far away. The 4 giants were in position. Again the hellish blue pattern scissored across the flagship's course. Prim had no time to swerve away. They racketed towards the dazzling pattern. At the last moment, bombardment fired a superfuser dead ahead. Superfuser and trellis met. The 2 insensate energies clawed each other like vast beasts of prey. Instead of spreading in its usual explosion, the fusion climbed the writhing squares of trellis, gobbling as it mounted. At the centre it left a widening circle of nothingness, through which the flagship got shot unharmed. It climbed to the trellis corners, barbed fire devouring fire. It reached the 4 giant vessels. Just for a moment they remained intact, each radiating a 3-dimensional rainbow, which flickered magically up and down the spectrum and was visibly hundreds of light years away. Then that blinding beauty fused, the 4 rainbow orbs merged and became ant-like, anti-light. They sucked, guttered, and went out, and a great gap in the nothingness of the universe appeared and spread. The ineluctable fabric of space itself was being devoured. Several Innisfar ships were engulfed in this cataclysm. The flagship was spared no time to rejoice. The moment of its greatest triumph was also the moment of its destruction. A translucent globe from an enemy destroyer caught its dorsal vein. Like an electronic monster, the globe spread tentacles of light and engulfed the flagship. Prim swore furiously. "Nothing responds anymore," he said, dropping his hands to his sides. It was doubtful if anyone heard him. A continuous sizzle filled their ears while their body electricity jumped in protest at what was taking place. The scene was rendered in unforgettable hues of orange and black as the light penetrated everything. Faces, clothes, floor, instrument, all were ravaged. And then it was over, that moment of near madness. They were left in darkness, only pale starlight touching their faces. Prim staggered for the controls. He swept his hand wildly over the banks of instruments. All were dead. "We're finished," he announced. Not a whisper of life anywhere. Even the air purifier was finished. He sank down, covering his face with his hands. For a while no one spoke. All were emotionally drained by the apocalyptic rigour of battle, the sag of defeat. "They must be chivalrous on Unisvar," you said at length. "They will have some residual code of battle. They will come and take us. We shall be honourably treated." Welded said harshly from a corner, "You still find room for cockiness. We ought to destroy you now." "Let's kill him," One Eye said, but made no move. They were all just jumps against the wall of starlight, lumps that spoke without relevance. "I only feel relaxed," you said. "The battle is over. We have lost honourably. Look at your captain here, half dead with fatigue. He fought well, resourcefully. No blame lies with him that we lost the gamble. Now he can sit back without remorse. And we can do the same. Knowing the future is not in our hands, soon they will be here to collect us and give us an honourable trial on Unisvar." The others made you no answer. The air was growing foul when the emissaries of Unisvar arrived, as you had predicted. They cut their way rapidly through the hull, rounded up all of the day's men aboard, transferred them to their own ship. Full speed was then made towards Unisvar. The flagship was left to its own ruined devices. You had been given a separate room with Prim, One Eye, and Welded. The latter two had been quite drained of all life by the magnitude of recent events. They sat together now, like a pair of dummies, not speaking. Prim was in better shape, but reaction had hit him now, and as he lay shaking on a couch. So you alone stood by the port and took in the spectacle as Unisvar approached. The planet which for so long had played such a prominent role in the galaxy was a curious spectacle at this late date in its history. About its equator circled two splendid rings, one beyond the other. Of these rings, the first was natural and consisted of the debris of Luna, disintegrated when anti-craft embedded in Era had suddenly exploded. The other ring was nothing more or less than a scrapyard. Breaking up spaceships on the ground had been forbidden ages ago on Unisvar, where piles of rusting metal were considered unsightly. Instead, every fragment of scrap was thrown into the orbit of the ring. Over a vast period of time, this ring had grown until it was 50 miles deep and several hundred wide. Far from being ugly, it was a thing of beauty, one of the 17 wonders of the galaxy. It gleamed like an array of countless jewels, every inch of metal polished eternally by the ceaseless wash of meteoric dust. When the ship in which you were held landed on the day side of the planet, the second ring was still faintly visible, straining like an arch around heaven. This was Unisvar of tears and pleasures, stuffed with forgotten memories and protracted time. After some delay, you and the others were disembarked, transferred to a small surface ship, and taken to the court of the highest suzerain in the city of Nion. The flagship crew was spirited off in one direction, and the troops, still in suspended animation, in another, while you and the 3 officers were ushered into a room little bigger than a cubicle. Here again was more delay. Food was brought, but you alone were inclined to eat it, supplementing it with supplies that you carried on your person. Various dignitaries visited you. Most of them departed gloomily, without speaking. Through a narrow window, you looked out onto the courtyard, brightened in one corner by a beautiful flowering Jenny Merritt. Groups of men and women stood about aimlessly, and no face was without its stamp of worry. Councillors walked as if climbing a dark stair. It became clear that some grave crisis pended. Its threat hung almost tangibly over the whole court. Finally and unexpectedly, an order reached your guards. With a flurry of excitement, you and the three with you were brought into a marble hall of audience and so into the personal presence of the highest suzerain inherit of Yinisvar and the region of Yinisvar. He was a pale man, dressed austerely in dark satins. He reclined on a couch, his features were leeched, yet his eyes spoke of supreme intelligence, and his voice was firm. Though his general pose suggested lethargy, his head was carried with an alertness that did not escape your attention. He looked you over in leisurely fashion, weighing each of your group in turn, and finally addressed you as the leader. He spoke without preamble. You barbarians, by the folly of your actions, have wrought havoc. You bowed and said with irony, "We regret it if we disturbed the great empire of Yinisvar." I did not refer to the empire. He waved his hand as if the empire were a bauble beneath his interest. I refer to the cosmos itself, by whose grace we all exist. The forces of nature have become unknit. You looked at him interrogatively, saying nothing. "Let me explain the fate which now threatens," the highest said. "In the hope you may die knowing a little of what we have done. Our galaxy is all beyond imagining. Philosophers, theologians, and scientists combine to tell us that its duration, vast but not infinite, is nearing an end. The rumour has circulated," he murmured. "I am pleased to hear that wisdom travels. We have learned in these last few hours that the galaxy, like an old curtain crumbling under its own weight, is dissolving, that this in fact is the end of all things, of past and future, and of all men." He paused in vain to watch for any shadows of alarm crossing your face, then continued, ignoring the frightened responses of your fellow captives. "Peace has reigned in the region for millennia, but when we learned your fleet was coming with hostile intent, our ancient ships and engines of attack, unused since the breakdown of the self-perpetuating war, were resurrected. Systems of production, schemes of battle, organizations of fighting men, all had to be resurrected from the long-dead past. It required haste such as we have never known, and regimentation such as we detest." "That's worth a cheer anyway," One Eye said with an attempt at courage. The highest regarded him for a moment before continuing. "We found in our hurried search for weapons to use against you, one which was invented eons ago and never used. It was considered dangerous since it harnessed the electrogravitic forces of the complex of space itself. Four gigantic machines called turbulators activated this force. They were the 4 ships you destroyed. We saw one of them on the margins of the regions days ago," Prim said. He had been following the highest with excitement, enthralled by his description of a gigantic military organization grinding into action. "The 4 turbulators had to be called from the distant quarters of the region, where our ancestors had discarded them," the Highness explained. "They were stationed across the course of your fleet with the results that you saw. The trellis is the basic pattern of creation itself. By ill chance you destroyed it, or rather caused it to begin consuming itself. Our scientists suggest that such is the antiquity of our galaxy, it no longer retains its ancient stability. Although the process is invisible, the disintegration you began continues. It is spreading rapidly, in fact, and nothing known can stop it." Prim staggered back as if struck. The highest stared at you, expecting a reply, as if certain for the first time you looked searchingly at One Eye and the others. They stared blankly ahead, too absorbed with the prospect of catastrophe to notice you. "Your scientists are to be congratulated," you said. "They are late with their discovery of instability, but at least they have found it out for themselves. It is a catastrophe my friends here and I did not begin. It began long ago, and it was about that I came to Yinisvar to tell them, and you." For the first time, the highest showed emotion. He rose from the couch, clutching its back fiercely. "You impertinent barbarian, you came here to rape and loot and pillage. What do you know of these matters? I came here to announce the end of things, you told them. How I arrived, whether as captive or victor, was no concern of mine, so long as the people of every world had been roused to know of my coming. That was why I staged the invasion. Such a thing is easily done, provided you can read and provoke the few basic human passions. If I had come here alone, you would have known who would have known or cared. As it is, the whole galaxy has its myriad eyes open, and I focus them on Yinisvar. They may die knowing the truth." "Indeed," the highest raised an imperial eyebrow. "Before I have you erased, perhaps you might care to tell me about this truth over which you have gone to such trouble." "By all means," you replied. "Perhaps you would care for a demonstration first." But the highest brushed the suggestion aside, snapping his fingers. You are a braggart, he said energetically. You waste my time, and there is little enough left. Guards! The guards advanced in a half circle, eager at the unprecedented chance to try their art on living flesh. This is the sort of demonstration I had in mind, you said, turning to meet them. 14 men comprised the guard. Their uniforms were laced, epauletted, and braided, but their antique swords looked functional. Without hesitation, you advanced toward the nearest soldier. He, with equal decision, brought down his sword with a heavy blow at your head. You flung up your arm and caught the blade full on it. The sword rang and crumbled into bits, as if turned to dust. The swordsman fell back in alarm. The other guards were on you, thrusting in slices. Their swords crumbled and snapped against you. Not one but wrecked itself against your body. When it was realized that you had, how would they think of it, a secret power, they fell back. You saw then, from a balcony, the snout of a machine was trained on you. Before you are annihilated, the Highness said, glancing pointedly up at the balcony, and tell me what form of trickery this is. Try out your own trick first, you suggested. To hasten matters, you stepped towards the highest. You are taken perhaps 2 paces before the machine on the balcony burst into action. A fusillade of better pellets screamed toward you, only to fall uselessly to the ground at your feet. At last, the High seemed daunted. Who are you? Where did you come from? That is what I wish to tell you, said. What I have to say must go out to every one of your people when a great history ends. It ends most fittingly with everyone knowing why. A man who perishes without reason makes a mockery of all he stands for. I come from a new world beyond this galaxy, and new because there the process of creation still goes on. New galaxies are forming out of the fathomless night, rising out of the margins of emptiness. My planet is new, and I am the first man upon it. It is nameless. Well, they said, so all you told me back on our ledge was true? Certainly, you said. You did not bother to tell him how you had learned to pilot the dead ship. You turned instead to Prim. Do you recall a conversation we once had about evolution? You claimed that man was its ultimate product. Prim nodded. Man is evolution's fittest fruit. In this galaxy, you told him. You looked at the highest, at Welded, at One Eye, without smiling. You said, you are evolution's highest flowering here. Think of the multitudes of experiments nature undertook before evolving you. She started with amino acids, then the amoeba, a simple cell. She was like a child at school then, but all this while she has been learning. I use analogies without subscribing to the pathetic fallacy, understand? Many of her experiments, even late ones like the ascension of vagabond cells, are failures. Man, on the whole, is her best so far. In the new galaxy from which I come, she begins with man. I am the earliest, most primitive form of life in my galaxy, the new amoeba. You went on to tell them how in you radical changes have been made. You were in truth a different species. Your waste system was fundamentally altered. Your digestive processes have been changed. Genetically, not only were the oldest characteristics transferable from one generation to another, walking and language genes ensured that those simple human skills were also inheritable. The psychological basis of your mind had been improved. Such of man's old random emotionalism had been eliminated entirely. And yet you had a range of altruism and identity with things surpassing man's capabilities. The highest heard you out in silence and then said, as the first of your species, how is it you can know so much about yourself? You smiled. It seemed a simple question. Because all our other improvements are merely in some way a modification of the pattern used in man's designing. I have in addition one priceless gift, an awareness not only of my psychological actions, thoughts if you will, but of my physiological ones. I can control the working of my every enzyme, see into each last blood cell. I am integrated as you could never be. For instance, disease can never touch me. I should recognize and check each at its inception, nor do I freeze in a moment of crisis and get over by automatic reflexes. Knowing myself, I am quite literally my own master. Though you have mastered your environment, you have never mastered yourselves. The highest came down from his dais. There was enough to worry about before you arrived, he said. Though I have lived 5 centuries, I am as a child again. Why, you must feel quite the Superman on Yinisvar. The derision in his tone pricked. Didn't you understand me? You flashed. In my world I rank as the amoeba. Should that make me proud as to what supersedes me? The highest raised a manicured hand and said, I concede your point. You are suitably humble about your own might. What's the good of all this? It was One Eye. He had stood helplessly by, with well-littered prim, his mind filled with fruitless plots of escape. Now he came to you with a mixture of defiance and cajolery. You got us here, you can get us back, he said. And let's not wait. Get us back to Owlenge, if you're such a Superman. You shook your head. You'll be no better off on Owlenge, of that I can assure you, you told him. I'm sorry you had to be involved in this, but it's been no worse for you than hiding out in the ruins of a city, and I am no Superman. No Superman, One Eye said angrily. He turned to the highest and exclaimed, No Superman, he says. Yet he drank down enough poison for an army. He fended off those shores. You saw him. He withstood a bombardment just then. Listen to me, you interrupted. Those things belong to a different principle. Watch this. You walked over to a wall. It was built of solid blocks of marble, polished and selected for their delicate patterning. You placed one hand with extended fingers upon it and pushed. When you withdrew your hand, 5 short tunnels had been pierced in the marble. It was a simple demonstration. They were properly impressed. You wiped your hand and returned to them, but they shuffled away from you, their lips pale. Yet I am no stronger than you told them. The difference is only this, that I come from a freshly created world, illuminated by the inexorable process of continuous creation, and you come from an old world. Think of your galaxy, how old it is. You do not know exactly, but you know it's incredibly old. The truth is, it is wearing out, as everything wears out in time. Nothing is meant to last. Ask yourself what everything is made of, a tissue of energies which outcrops and becomes matter. That tissue of energy, since the beginning of time, has been running down, wearing thin. All matter which is composed of it has worn thin with it. The great magical batteries of your galaxy are slowing, so all protons and neutrons lose their polarity. Their charges have been run low, they cannot combine as they once used to. Steel has not the strength that paper once possessed. Wood is water. Prim interrupted. You're trying to deceive us, he told you in a trembling voice. It's only you who can pierce marble with a finger, or withstand poison, swords, or bombardment. We would die. Do you take us for fools? No, you replied. You would die, as you say. You are composed of the same exhausted nuclei as everything else. That is exactly why you could not detect this process long ago. I can withstand almost anything you have to offer. Only because the very stuff of which I am made is new. I am the one fresh factor in an exhausted galaxy. You paused and went over to the highest. He had become very pale. This ravening monster released between us, out in space. I suppose that merely hastens the exhaustion process, he asked. Yes, the fabric is torn, the gap widens to embrace your island universe. The highest closed his eyes. When he raised his lids again, his regard fixed on you with the alertness of a bird. Our poisons cannot affect you, he said, yet you manage to live among us. How can our food nourish you? I had brought my private supply of calories with me when I left my own world. I was not unprepared. I had even to bring oxygen concentrates. You then told the highest of the effects your unexhausted air had had on Shouter, the spool seller, how it had been riddled as if by insane radiations. And you told him how useful Shouter's microspools library had been. An opportunist, the highest said. My congratulations to you. He pulled out at his lip and looked, for a moment, almost amused. Have you a moment to spare, if the question has meaning any longer? Perhaps the others will excuse us. Something in his manner had changed. He motioned to you with a sharp gesture and made for a door. What did you do? You took a last look over your shoulder at the desolate group whose function in life had abruptly vanished, gave One Eye a mocking salute, and followed. The highest walked down a corridor at a pace which belied his earlier languor. He flung open another door, and you both emerged onto a balcony overlooking the proud city of Nyon. A cool evening wind blew, clouds masked the setting sun, the great panorama of avenue and river lay strangely deserted from distant spires to the pavements of a nearby concourse. Nothing stirred except a fabric far below, in a mansion window. How long would this exhaustion process have taken had not we accelerated? The highest asked almost casually, leaning on the rail and looking down. It must have worsened for centuries, you told him. It might have gone on for centuries more. You felt a softness for him, and for all men, all the myriads of them, whether they cheated or played fair, loved or hated, all their follies and limitations were forgiven. They were primitives, coming from the dark, fading back into the dark, with a glimpsing of awareness to give poignance. The highest took a deep breath of evening. It's ending. Now comes the time to adventure into death. He took another lungful of the darkening wind. If, and you have, a ringside seat, my friend, it will indeed be a sight to see, but you must get back before our craft disintegrates. They won't be capable of carrying you much longer. You said gently, everyone must be told what is happening. That seems imperative. I will not forget. He turned and faced you. What impulse brought you here? Nostalgia? Curiosity? Pity? What feelings do you have for us shadows? And what unexpected weakness was it that choked the words in your throat? Why did you turn your face away so that he could not see your eyes? I wanted man to be aware of what is happening to him, you said at last. That much was owed him. We owed it. You are our fathers. We are your heirs. He touched you gently, asking in a firm voice, what should be told to the people of the galaxy? You looked out over a city now, pricked with lights, and up to the evening sky. You found no comfort there or in yourself. Tell them again what a galaxy is, you said. Don't soften. They are brave. Explain to them once more that there are galaxies like grains of sand, each galaxy a cosmic laboratory for the blind experiments of nature. Explain to them how little individual lives mean compared to the unknown goals of the race. Tell them that this laboratory is closing. A newer one with more modern equipment is opening just down the street. They shall be told, the highest said. His face a shadow as night fell upon the old city and the stars. We who have already superseded you record these scenes now in your honor, as you once honored man. Requiescat in pace.